What is one secret your parents can never know? Story 1. This happened during my freshman year of high school. One of my friends somehow got his hands on some weed, and since I'd never tried it before, we had the ridiculous idea to smoke it. He came over with a couple of other friends. The original plan was to head to the forest near my house to smoke, but it was freezing outside, so that plan was quickly scrapped. One of us suggested smoking on my porch, but I wasn't comfortable with that idea either. Somehow we came up with the dumbest plan imaginable: hotboxing my bathroom. Keep in mind, my parents were going to be home from work in about an hour, and if they caught me, my life would be over. We quickly improvised a makeshift bong using a Gatorade bottle, then cleared everything out of the bathroom. We lit up and smoked for about 10 minutes. After we finished, we rushed to clean up, spraying an entire bottle of Axe in the bathroom to try to mask the smell. My friends, stoned out of their minds, left shortly after. I went back upstairs to check the bathroom and was hit with the overwhelming smell of weed. Panicking, I tried every possible thing I could think of to get rid of the odor, but nothing worked. Then I called my parents, who worked together, to see how far away they were. They said they were 15 minutes away. At that point, I knew I was doomed. Here's where my panicked teenage brain came up with the stupidest idea anyone could ever imagine. I decided to burn my bathroom down to cover the smell. I grabbed some towels, lit them on fire, and tried to set the sink area ablaze. The fire caught, but it was spreading slowly. Realizing the enormity of what I'd done, I quickly called 911. Within 3 minutes, fire trucks were outside my house. The firefighters put out the flames, and my parents arrived home, completely shocked. Half of my bathroom was charred, and the door had been knocked down. The fire department concluded that the fire was likely caused by an electrical short in one of the outlets, which had apparently ignited a towel. That night I lay in bed, reflecting on how unbelievably stupid I'd been and what I'd just done. To this day, my parents still don't know the truth. Story 2. When I was about 6 or 7, we had Christmas with the extended family. One of my uncles was there, and I was always a little afraid of him. He had done some time for a drug charge and had only gotten out a year or two before. At one point, I walked into the kitchen and found him standing there with a giant wedge of cheese. He looked up at me and asked if I wanted any. I nodded eagerly because, at that age, I absolutely loved cheese. He said, "Okay, but you can't tell your parents. You'll ruin your dinner and they'll get mad at me." He sliced a few pieces for me and we ate them in silence. Afterward, I left the kitchen feeling like I had just participated in some sort of terrible crime with my ex-con uncle. I was completely convinced I was an accomplice in his cheese smuggling operation. To this day, I've never told my parents. And what would happen if they found out? Well, they'd finally know the truth. The reason I didn't eat Christmas dinner that year in the early 90s was because I had already filled up on expensive cheese. Story 3. My dad was always a heavy drinker. Growing up, it wasn't uncommon for him to get so drunk he'd fall down. In fact, he was banned from several bars, not because he caused trouble or started fights, even though he was a big, intimidating guy, but because he'd get so drunk, he became a liability. He'd fall, get hurt, break things, or just be an annoyance to other patrons. As a result, he mostly drank at home, usually whiskey. On some nights, he'd drink so much that he'd stumble to the bathroom or kitchen and end up falling. This became a regular occurrence throughout my childhood. Sometimes I'd help him up. Other times, I'd just let him lie there, make him comfortable, and leave him to sleep it off. My mom usually didn't hear him fall since she was in bed, but I always heard it. No matter where or how he fell, the sound was always the same. One night during Christmas break from college, I was lying in bed when I heard that familiar sound. It was around 2:45 a.m. I got up to check on him, as usual, and found him lying on the floor near the table. I went over to help him, but he was unusually limp and unresponsive, only grunting faintly. He wasn't trying to help me lift him, which was strange, but I assumed he was just drunker than usual. Since I couldn't get him up, I decided to follow my usual routine. I checked his head to make sure he wasn't bleeding or injured, hid his whiskey bottle so he couldn't drink more, cleaned his glasses and set them on the table, and turned him on his side in case he vomited. He rarely did, but I like to be cautious. When I took off his glasses, I noticed a strained expression on his face. He was staring through me with a look I couldn't quite place. I asked if he was okay, expecting a mumbled, "Yeah," as usual, but all I got was a low, strained grunt. I figured he was just extremely drunk and didn't think much of it. I turned off the TV and went back to bed. About 3 hours later, I woke to my mom frantically banging on my door. She sounded panicked and said, "I think your dad's dead." I ran to the kitchen and found him lying in the exact same spot I had left him. His body was cold. He wasn't breathing. He had died. When the coroner arrived, they estimated his time of death to be between 3 and 4 a.m. Later, we learned he had suffered a heart attack. Looking back, I can't help but wonder if those small, unusual behaviors I noticed were signs he was dying. At the time, I dismissed them, assuming he was just drunk. I blame myself for leaving him there and not checking further. He died right where I left him, and I carried that guilt for years. I've since come to understand it wasn't my fault, but the guilt still creeps in sometimes. That day, my mom asked me if I'd heard him fall during the night. Overcome with guilt and shame, I lied and said, "No, I must have slept through it." I was terrified that if I told her the truth, she would blame me. Deep down, I know she wouldn't, but I can't say the same for some of my dad's side of the family. I fear they would judge me harshly for leaving him on the floor, even though it was something I'd done countless times growing up. That's just how things were in our house. I've never told anyone this, not even my mom, because I'm afraid people will see me as the person who let his dad die. Story 4. I can never tell my parents that my number one goal as a parent is to handle relationship issues differently than they did. They went through an incredibly messy divorce when I was 8 years old. My only memory of them together is them screaming at each other while my sister and I hid in our rooms. Afterward, it was over a decade of them bad-mouthing each other to us, dragging us into their arguments, and guilt-tripping us whenever they felt we were spending more time with the other parent. Even now, 20 years later, my mom occasionally talks badly about my dad and stepmom. No matter how many times I've asked her to stop, it still happens. I'm happily married now, but if I were ever to get divorced, I'm determined never to put my daughter through the same experience. I will never involve her in arguments, speak poorly about her father in front of her, or make her feel guilty for maintaining a relationship with him. It's the one valuable lesson I've taken from my parents. But I know they would be devastated if they realized the true impact their behavior had on me. Story 5. When I was about 11 or 12, I went through a serious pyromaniac phase. One Saturday, I got the bright idea to grab a steel can and fill it with gasoline, then head out to the woods near my house. This wasn't just some small can of spaghetti sauce. It was a gallon-sized bulk can filled to the brim with gasoline. Once I got to the woods, I decided it would be cool to light the can on fire and see what happened. As expected, it caught fire immediately and burned steadily inside the can. After about 15 minutes, I got bored and figured I'd try to put it out. That's when things went horribly wrong. While trying to extinguish the fire, I accidentally knocked the can over, spilling gasoline all over the forest floor. Within seconds, the flames spread in a massive fireball. Panicking, I sprinted back to my house to grab water. I came running back with about 5 gallons, but by the time I returned, the fire had spread too far for me to do anything. Realizing my efforts were useless, I decided the best course of action was to pretend nothing happened. I ran back inside, sat down, and started playing video games. The fire, however, didn't go unnoticed. Within an hour, the entire fire department was on the scene battling the massive blaze, which had spread to about 3 to 4 acres of forest. The fire had engulfed the woods that separated my parents' house from a nearby road. That road was infamous for its drug activity and meth houses. While the firefighters were working to contain the flames, they discovered that one of the houses closest to the fire was actually a large meth cookhouse. Cops were called, and a huge bust went down. The fire was immediately blamed on the people at the meth house, and my parents never suspected a thing. They just accepted the explanation without question. It's been 20 years since that day, and my parents still have no idea what really happened, and they never will. Story 6. When I was 7 years old, my parents, my younger brother Nino, who has Down syndrome, and I went to visit a house for children with Down syndrome. My parents didn't explain why we were there, probably because they knew I wouldn't be able to handle the truth. Nino was 5 at the time, and we've always been incredibly close. While my parents were talking to the staff, Nino and I went to a playroom with the other children. As I was throwing a baseball with another boy, a chubby kid with Down syndrome, I overheard my mom ask, "Are there any schools for children with special needs in this area?" In that moment, everything clicked. I was overwhelmed and angry, though I didn't fully understand why. While we continued playing, the boy threw the ball to me laughing. I froze, holding the ball in my hands. I looked at his face, still smiling, and then at my brother, who seemed uneasy and uncomfortable. For some reason, I convinced myself that this boy was mocking me. laughing at the idea of my brother being taken away to live here. I snapped. Without thinking, I threw the ball as hard as I could at the boy's face. It hit him squarely, and his mouth and nose started bleeding. Before he could even cry, I shouted, "No, Nino!" like I was protecting him from some invisible threat. The boy let out a loud, shocked scream, and chaos erupted. My parents and the staff rushed in. I quickly lied, telling them, "It's crazy, Papa, Mama. I told Nino he's going to live here, and he threw the ball at that boy's face." My parents were mortified, apologizing profusely to the staff. We left the place shortly after. In the car, my parents asked my brother why he had thrown the ball, but he just sat there angrily, refusing to answer. It was as if he understood what I had done and silently played along. Now, all these years later, Nino is turning 19. He still lives at home, has a job, and is nearly independent. He remains the joy of our lives, and I wouldn't trade him for anything. Looking back, I realized my actions that day were driven by fear and love for my brother, even if they were completely irrational. Story 7. I created a throwaway account for this because it's a deeply personal story. What no one else knows is that my little brother's car accident was actually a suicide. My teenage brother had been struggling with OCD and social anxiety for a while. It was something all of us siblings had dealt with growing up, but it hit him particularly hard. The rest of us had moved away from our hometown years ago, leaving him to face it alone. After the accident, everyone wondered how it could have happened. Most assumed he was skipping class, as he often avoided going to school. But I was the one who found the letter after his funeral. Instead of showing it to anyone, I destroyed it. I also covered up any other evidence, including his search history, which contained things like fatal car crashes. I made that decision because of our family circumstances. Years ago, my dad had been an alcoholic. The only reason he quit drinking was because my mom threatened to divorce him and take us kids away. He's been sober for nearly 15 years now because of that, but I knew this tragedy could push him over the edge. At the same time, my mom was battling stage 2 breast cancer. She was bedridden and going through chemotherapy while all of this unfolded. My father was extremely close to my youngest brother, and losing him was devastating enough. I stayed with my parents for several weeks after the accident to make sure they would be okay. The thought of my dad possibly turning back to alcohol, or my mom deteriorating even more from the stress, solidified my choice to keep the truth hidden. No one else knows except for me and my therapist. I made this decision for my family, and I've come to terms with the fact that it's something I'll carry for the rest of my life. But sometimes it still hurts. Story 8. When I was in college, I had a few experiences that could have seriously altered my life if my parents ever found out. This particular story happened about 4 to 5 years ago, during my junior year. Towards the end of high school, I started experimenting with various pills, a habit that unfortunately carried over into college. I was into things like oxycodone, Xanax, and Klonopin. By my junior year, I had developed a high tolerance to Xanax, and one night, before heading to a big house party, I had already taken 9.5 milligrams. To put it mildly, this is an insane amount of Xanax and could easily cause an overdose for most people. At the time, I was a 6'3", 280-pound guy with a high tolerance, so I was still somewhat functional, but barely. Once we got to the party, I drank about 6 beers, which completely wrecked me. At some point, I went to the bathroom and, being the kind of person I was back then, started snooping through the medicine cabinet. That's when I found a full prescription of Adderall, which I'd never taken before. Impulsively, I decided to steal the entire bottle and stash it in my backpack, which I had brought to carry my beers. Feeling paranoid and sick, I told my friends I wasn't feeling well and needed to leave. I splashed water on my face, coughed a bit, and acted the part. My friends believed me, as I rarely had trouble handling alcohol or drugs, so they knew something must have been off. As we started walking back to our apartment, we were stopped by campus police. It was around 1 or 2 a.m., and the officers just wanted to check in, especially with the girls in our group. Of the 6 of us, only 2 were 21, and I was still 20. The officers asked if we were all of age, and the 2 who were 21 quickly showed their IDs, which seemed to satisfy the cops. If they had asked to see mine or decided to search my bag, I would have been in massive trouble. At that moment, I was carrying stolen prescription drugs, paraphernalia, and alcohol, all while being underage. Since we were on school property, I could have faced charges for underage drinking, theft, possession of a controlled substance, intent to distribute, since it was a full bottle of Adderall, and more. I would have been expelled, likely served jail time, and destroyed my future. Miraculously, the officers let us go, and my friends were stunned when they found out what I had done. Back at the apartment, the night escalated. The four of us guys stayed up taking large amounts of Adderall, smoking weed, and drinking. The bottle contained around 30 to 40 pills, each 30 milligrams, and none of us had ever tried it before. We stayed awake the entire night, playing video games, smoking cigarettes, and even experimenting with things like lighting hand sanitizer on fire. By 10 a.m. the next day, my girlfriend woke up to find us still partying. Eventually, it was just me and one other friend left, still taking Adderall and hallucinating from the combination of drugs and extreme sleep deprivation. The hallucinations were wild. I saw Call of Duty playing on a turned-off TV screen, and when I focused on random objects, they seemed to morph into bizarre, surreal scenes. My friends started hallucinating too, and we spent hours walking around outside and staring at things in disbelief. By 10 p.m. the second day, I had been awake for over 36 hours, and the effects of the Adderall were unbearable. My friend eventually went to bed, but I couldn't sleep. I started having a severe panic attack, sweating profusely, struggling to breathe, and convinced I was going to die. I tried to tough it out, but by 10 a.m. the next day, I gave up and had my girlfriend take me to the ER. I waited 3 agonizing hours to see a doctor, feeling like I was suffocating the entire time. The staff repeatedly asked if I had tried to harm myself due to the amount of drugs I had taken. When I finally saw the doctor, he was shocked I was still awake. He told me there was no way the Adderall alone could offset the Xanax I had taken, and he couldn't understand how I hadn't passed out or overdosed. After some tests, they gave me a shot of something to calm me down and sent me home. I slept for over 24 hours and woke up feeling like I had died and come back to life. When my dad called to check in, I lied and told him I had a stomach problem. He believed me, and I managed to get away with everything. That day was a turning point. I've never touched prescription drugs since. Looking back, I'm grateful to be alive, but I know my parents would never forgive me if they found out. Story 9. When I was 11, I really didn't want to go to school the next day. On the way home from a Super Bowl party with my mom, I started faking a stomachache. She told me she'd give me something for it when we got home, but I knew that wouldn't be enough to get me out of school. So I kicked it up a notch, fake crying and insisting that it really, really hurt. By the time we pulled into the driveway of our apartment, she looked at me and said, "I'm taking you to the hospital, but if you're faking, I'm gonna beat your ass." Classic Mexican household. I doubled down and stuck to my story, sobbing about the pain. At the hospital, the doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with me, so they decided to do a CT scan. My mom agreed, and off I went. After the scan, the doctor told us he thought my appendix looked a little inflamed and that it was probably causing the pain. They recommended surgery to remove it. At that moment, my heart sank. I realized I had gone way too far but couldn't back out now. The surgery was scheduled for the next morning. By then, half my family had shown up to support and pray for me. I was terrified. Before surgery, a nurse gave me a shot in my butt cheek. I accidentally tensed up, and it hurt so much it felt like karma. They wheeled me into surgery, and everything went fine. The surgeon even came to recovery to show me my appendix, which was oddly fascinating. I stayed in the hospital for about a day, and before I was discharged, the doctor told my mom I couldn't go back to school for 2 weeks to let the cuts heal. This was the silver lining I didn't expect. For 2 weeks, I was treated like royalty. My mom made my brother fetch me whatever I wanted because she didn't want me moving around. My church's Royal Rangers group even visited me and brought a huge basket filled with snacks and candy. I spent the entire 2 weeks playing video games and living my best life. I eventually had to go back to school, but those 2 weeks were some of the best of my life. Now I'm 22, and I've never told anyone that I was faking the whole thing. Honestly, I like to think of it as one of my greatest achievements. Sorry, Mom. Storytime. During a family vacation in a province in the Philippines, we stayed near the coast where one of the local fishermen managed to catch a hawksbill turtle. My dad bought it for about 2 pesos, and we kept it for the week. It was fascinating to watch the turtle swim in the ocean water, tied to a nylon cord to keep it from escaping. As the trip neared its end, my dad announced that the turtle would be killed and eaten by the neighbors after we left. I was horrified and didn't take the news well, voicing my objections as loudly as I could. The night before we were set to leave, I decided to take matters into my own hands. Secretly, I used a nail cutter to weaken the cord tied to the turtle's shell, ensuring it would break easily. The next morning, my brother and I took the turtle for an early swim, and as planned, the turtle broke free and swam away. My brother was shocked, and I had to act surprised as well, pretending to be upset that the turtle had escaped. When my dad found out, he was furious and accused me of deliberately setting the turtle free. I denied it, blaming the turtle for chewing through the cord overnight. A pretty weak excuse, but it worked. 4 years later, no one in my family knows the truth. I couldn't bear the thought of that poor turtle being killed. Wherever it is now, I hope it's thriving and repopulating the ocean with its turtle friends. Stay safe out there, little buddy. Story 11. One holiday weekend, my parents went on a 4-day vacation, leaving my older sister in charge of the house. She decided to take advantage of the situation by bringing home a guy she'd met at a party on Friday night. The next morning, the guy abruptly told her he needed to leave but said he'd be back later that night. He left behind a backpack, asking her to hold on to it. My sister agreed but mentioned she wouldn't be home at a certain time due to an appointment. A couple of hours later, she received a furious call from the woman who had hosted the party. The woman accused my sister and the guy of stealing jewelry, cash, pill bottles, and checkbooks from her home. She threatened to call the cops. My sister denied any involvement, but opened the guy's backpack while on the call. To her horror, it was filled with stolen items, including wallets, pill bottles, and needles. Panicked, she told the woman what she'd found. Hearing about the drugs, the woman changed her tone, deciding not to call the cops. Instead, she demanded my sister's address so she could come and retrieve the bag. My sister hung up and texted the guy to confront him. He called her back with a flimsy excuse for the stolen items and said he'd be coming by later to get the bag. My sister told him not to come, but was panicking. At this point, she called me and my girlfriend to come over. When we arrived, she showed us the bag and explained the situation. I immediately told her to call the police and hand over the bag, but she refused, saying she didn't want my parents to find out. Instead, she asked us to stay at the house while she went to her appointment. Not long after she left, things escalated. The guy called her again, saying he was coming to get the bag no matter what she said. Then we heard noises outside the house, followed by someone trying to force open the side garage door. I grabbed my shotgun, loaded it, and shouted, "Who the phenom is out there?" The noise stopped immediately, followed by the sound of someone running, jumping fences, and knocking over trash cans. I called the police, who said they'd send someone out when they had time since the immediate threat was gone. When my sister returned, she finally came clean about everything. The guy and the woman who hosted the party started texting her again, claiming they were now together in a parking lot nearby and would come by to sort things out. At this point, I took my sister's phone and stopped her from responding. The police eventually arrived, confiscated the bag, and gave us a lecture about avoiding dangerous people. They called the woman who accused my sister of stealing the items. The police arranged to meet the woman and the guy at their location to return the property. After that, we never heard from the woman, the guy, or the police again. My sister wisely cut ties with those people and their circle. When my parents returned, I warned them about supposed break-ins in the area, suggesting they stay vigilant. My mom panicked, ranting about the need for better security, while my dad thanked me for the warning but was annoyed I'd upset her. To this day, they don't know the full story. Story 12. When I was younger, my mom and I traveled to Puerto Rico to meet her side of the family. We stayed at my aunt's huge house, which was conveniently located near the beach and a few clubs. One evening, my mom went out, and I decided to check out the beach. That's where I met a stunningly gorgeous girl. We hit it off instantly, talking for hours. Later, we ended up going to a nightclub together. Afterward, we found a private spot on the beach where things escalated to third base. Unfortunately, we had to cut things short when we noticed people approaching. We exchanged numbers and planned to meet again later in the week. A few days later, my mom took me to a family gathering at a large gazebo in the forest. It was a big party with tons of people, as my mom has 7 siblings, most of whom I hadn't met before. As we made our rounds meeting family members, I suddenly found myself face to face with none other than the girl from the beach. She was standing next to her parents, and we both froze in shock. Almost simultaneously, we turned to our parents and asked, "Who is this?" My mom smiled and said, "Why, this is your cousin." I was mortified. I tried my best to maintain composure while my uncle and aunt made small talk, but the entire time, I felt like I might puke. When they finally walked away, I downed several drinks to cope. Later that evening, after a lot of laughter and awkwardness, the girl and I decided to take our secret to the grave. Story 13. It's not exactly a secret, but I would never tell my mom that she's the root cause of most of my struggles as an adult. She's the reason behind my severe anxiety, depression, trust issues, and even my clinically diagnosed agoraphobia. Growing up, I didn't have a real childhood. Instead of playing outside with friends, I was often sitting by the bathroom door, begging her not to hurt herself. My anxiety and fear of public spaces stem from years of her publicly humiliating me, sometimes deliberately to teach me a lesson, other times due to her uncontrollable manic outbursts. Now, the fear of public humiliation is so deeply ingrained in me that it's paralyzing. People can easily manipulate me with guilt because my mom was a master of guilt trips. I'd never tell her any of this because she's gotten help and is doing better now. But that doesn't erase the damage done to my childhood or the mental health issues I still face. I also wouldn't tell my dad that his lack of affection when we were kids is the reason I'm so uncomfortable with showing affection now. Don't get me wrong, my parents loved me. They made sure we had food, clean clothes, and a roof over our heads, but emotionally they damaged us in ways they'll never fully understand. To any fathers reading this, hug your kids, always. Don't let them grow up to be adults who feel awkward and uncomfortable at the thought of hugging you. If you have a daughter, tell her she's beautiful and that you love her. If you have a son, tell him he's a good young man and that you're proud of him. Be affectionate with your children. You have no idea how much it can mess them up in the long run if you're not. Story 14. I hope I don't bring anyone down with my story, but here goes. My parents are deeply nonviolent people. They are staunchly pro-life, oppose the death penalty, and are die-hard Christians. My dad, despite being drafted during Vietnam, served as a conscientious objector. He was an MP, military police, for his entire tour and refused to carry a sidearm, relying instead on a nightstick and pepper spray. His time in service was mostly spent collecting drunken soldiers and ensuring they got to their bunks safely. I, however, chose a different path. I enlisted in the Navy and started my service aboard a submarine. Unfortunately, a medical condition disqualified me from continuing in that role, and I was reassigned to an expeditionary warfare unit at Little Creek Naval Amphibious Base for the remainder of my enlistment. During those 4 years, I was forced to fire on enemy combatants multiple times. I saw the darkest sides of humanity, and it changed me. My roommate on base often told me that sometimes to protect others, you have to make the hard choices others might not have the conviction to make. I've come to accept that perspective. I don't regret my actions because I valued the lives of my friends and myself over those of enemy combatants. Given my parents' beliefs, I have no idea how they would react to the things I did during my service. Because of this, I've chosen to never talk about it with them. Oddly enough, I've realized that my grandfather was in a similar situation. He served in the Navy during World War II as a gunner's mate on landing craft in the Pacific, often manning a .50 caliber machine gun to provide cover for infantry. For reasons I still don't fully understand, he shared many of his wartime stories with me, but not with my dad. Perhaps he knew my dad's beliefs wouldn't allow him to truly understand. To add another layer to this, I'm an atheist. Even during combat, under fire with friends wounded around me, I never once thought to pray or ask God for help. I don't believe in any supernatural force intervening in the world. I believe in evolution and the science behind how humanity came to exist. The only person in my family who knows I'm an atheist is my older brother. He's a photographer and painter, an agnostic, and much more in line with my parents' worldview. But he's also more accepting, which is why I can share this with him. Story 15. From when I was younger, I dated a girl off and on for about 2 years. I'm female. We spent so much time together that both of our parents thought we were just best friends. My first kiss and first soul experience were both with her. What's strange is that I don't identify as a lesbian or even bi. I was just deeply attracted to her, and I haven't felt that way about another girl since. My mom would probably freak out a little if she found out, but might laugh it off initially. However, deep down, I think it would bother her, and she'd eventually bring it up in a serious conversation. I don't trust her enough to tell her for both my sake and my ex-girlfriend's. My dad, he wouldn't know because he's never really been around enough to know much about me. In my current adulthood, I live a BDSM lifestyle at home, where I'm a dom. I'd never tell my mom about it. She wouldn't understand, and it would lead to endless arguments and judgment about my choices. Over the years, I've built a much better relationship with her than I ever had growing up. And I don't want to ruin that by sharing something she wouldn't accept. Story 16. This might be a small story, but it's one that has stuck with me since third grade. In Texas schools, we had this discipline system with a chart that had green, yellow, and red spots. Green meant you were good, yellow was a warning or timeout, and red meant you were sent to the office. I was always the goody-goody kid who had to have perfect grades and behavior. Looking back, I probably annoyed everyone around me. Sorry about that. It was the first week of school, on a Friday, which was library day. I was so excited because I loved going to the library and seeing Mrs. N, the elderly librarian. She was my favorite teacher. After recess, my teacher announced it was time to go to the library. I was thrilled, eagerly got in line, not as the line leader sadly, and prepared to head out. To my surprise and dismay, the class started heading toward the playground instead of the library. I realized I didn't have my sunglasses, so I rushed back to the classroom to grab them. Apparently, I wasn't as fast as I thought, because my teacher came back to find me digging through my desk. She was furious and gave me a stern talking to. As punishment, I had to change my color from green to yellow. At the end of the day, everyone in class had to color the date on their calendars with the color they ended up on, and then show it to the teacher for a signature before taking it home for their parents to sign. Instead of accepting my fate, I colored the square green and never showed it to the teacher. No one ever found out about my act of rebellion, and my parents never knew. Looking back, it feels like such a small thing, but at the time it felt like a daring and risky move. Third grade me was living on the edge. Story 17. When I was younger, I set off on what was supposed to be a trip around the world. In reality, it was a journey into addiction, depression, and isolation. Around the same time, my mom married a new husband who had a lot of money. She started sending me money each month to help me out, believing she was supporting my travels and adventures. But instead of exploring the world, I spent those years holed up in dingy one-room apartments in various cities, using the money to feed my growing drug addiction. I would occasionally go outside, take a few pictures with strangers or in scenic places, and send them back to her. It was all a front to make her believe I was having the time of my life and making amazing memories. This charade went on for about 7 years. To this day, she tells her friends about the grand adventure I went on and how proud she is that she was able to help me experience the world. Although I'd love to talk to someone in my family about what I really went through, the addiction, the lasting physical and psychological scars, I never will. If my mom found out, it would break her heart. She'd feel like her generosity and love were wasted, and the dream she has of the life I supposedly led would be shattered. So, at family events, when she pulls out the photos and asks me to tell stories about my travels, I smile, nod, and play along. It feels like the least I can do to preserve her happiness, even if it means burying the truth forever. Story 18. The only real secret I've kept from my parents is what happened to me at a Christmas party when I was 15. A large group of teens ranging from 14 to 19 piled into the canopy of a ute to pick up some others in the countryside. At some point, a girl went through my 18-year-old brother's wallet. My brother, who was and still is an aggressive douchebag, was furious. Since he couldn't hit her, which I guess is the only good thing about this, he turned his anger on me instead. In front of a lot of family friends, he beat the absolute crap out of me. It wasn't just a shove or a punch. He really hurt me. No one stepped in. When we got back to the adults, the mood had completely shifted. Everyone was quiet and somber. I stayed in the car for the next 4 hours in too much pain to even get out. From what I overheard, everyone was pretty shaken by what happened, and the rest of the night was awkward and subdued. My brother has been in the Army for the past 9 years and is slightly less of a douchebag now, but I still wouldn't want to get on his bad side. Growing up, I told my parents almost everything, mostly because I was the boring kid who didn't do drugs or smoke like my friends did. I thought they'd be proud of me for staying away from that stuff, so I told them the truth about what my friends were up to. But this stayed my secret. Story 19. About a year ago, when I was a junior in high school, I was living the stereotypical life of a teenager, smoking weed and watching cartoons. One day, my dealer, who was also a buddy, texted me to let me know he was going out of town, so I decided to pick up about an eighth. I ground it all up and hid it in my closet. Big mistake. Within 2 days, the smell had completely taken over the house. It was so strong that anyone walking in could tell something was up. My mom, suspicious, asked my dad to search my closet when she got back from work. My dad came to me first and said, "I'm only asking once. Do you have anything in there?" That moment was terrifying. After hesitating, I told him the truth. Yes. To my surprise, instead of getting mad, he grinned. He proceeded to show me where he used to hide his own weed from my mom when he was younger. Then he gave me some tips on how to conceal it better. Later, we even bonded over it. On a trip to Puerto Rico, we got some bud and smoked together on the beach under the moonlight. It was one of the coolest experiences of my life. The moral of the story: if my mom ever finds out, there would be two very shallow graves in the backyard. Story 20. When I was in first grade, my brother and I used to sneak over to my elementary school after hours and on weekends to play on the flagpole rope. We loved swinging on it, pretending it was some sort of carnival ride. One day, my brother decided to push me higher and faster than ever. Well, centrifugal force had other plans, and I ended up flying off the rope. I landed chin first on the concrete, peeling the skin back and exposing the bone. It was bad. I needed about 15 stitches. When our mom asked us what happened, there was no way we were going to admit the truth. So, we came up with a story. I had gone down the slide head first on the school's playground and cut myself on broken glass at the bottom. She was furious. The next day, she marched into the school, dragging me along, and demanded to see the principal. I waited outside the office, but I could hear her shouting through the door. I didn't understand all of her words, but the rage in her voice was unmistakable. The principal ended up calling our house later that day to apologize and assured her that the custodian had cleaned up the glass on the playground. Looking back, I realized the principal must have been lying to save face, as there was no glass at all. Even now, 20 years later, my mom still tells this story with pride. How she gave the principal a piece of her mind and stood up for her injured son. It's possibly one of her proudest moments. There's no way I could ever tell her the truth. Not only would it shatter the story she's been retelling for decades, but it would also ruin that moment of triumph for her. So, I'll keep the secret. Sometimes the lie is kinder than the truth. Story 21. I'm 17, and if my parents ever found out the truth about my life, I'm pretty sure it would shatter the way they see me. For starters, I've been smoking, drinking, and doing drugs for years. Whenever someone even jokes about me smoking pot, my mom aggressively shuts it down, insisting I would never do something like that. It's ironic because I know she smokes weed occasionally herself. Weed, though, is just the tip of the iceberg. I've done coke, acid, shrooms, hero, and a few other drugs. I'm not proud of it, but it's all been for recreational purposes, not because I'm dependent on them. We live a typical middle-class life, neither rich nor poor, so it's not like I've been driven to this by financial stress or anything like that. It's just something I got into with my friends, but my parents would lose it if they ever found out. Speaking of friends, my parents think I have a huge, thriving social circle. In reality, I only have a few close friends, and even with them, I don't feel particularly close anymore. I'm that friend who's always down to hang out anytime, anywhere, cracking jokes and keeping the vibe light. But deep down, I don't feel like I belong anywhere. My parents think everything in my world is fine, but it's not. If they knew how I really felt, I'm not sure if their opinion of me would change for better or worse. On top of that, they think I'm doing fine in school, and while I'm doing okay, I have about a 3.0 GPA, it's not nearly good enough to get into a decent college or earn any scholarships. They have no idea how competitive college admissions are these days, and I know they'll be baffled when I don't get into any worthwhile schools. I don't plan on telling them how bad the situation really is. I'm just hoping to avoid that conversation as long as possible. If my parents ever found out about any of this, it would destroy their perception of me. They're the most important people in my life, and losing their trust or disappointing them would kill me. So for now, I keep it all buried, hoping I can figure out how to get my life together before it all comes crashing down. Story 22. When I was 17, I handed a cop a fake ID after drinking underage, while the people I was with stole kegs. In Canada, the legal drinking age is 19. By the time my friends and I were 13, we were already drinking at each other's houses, and by 17, most of us had fake IDs. One night, a friend and I met some older guys who invited us to a keg party in the countryside. We paid the entrance fee, wrote our names on cups to keep track, and started socializing. While we were mingling and smoking with strangers, the two guys we came with disappeared for a while. About 20 minutes later, they came back and urgently told us we had to leave immediately. Confused but sensing their urgency, We followed them to the car. Just as we were approaching, multiple police cars drove past us with lights flashing. Unfortunately, one officer spotted us and pulled over. The cop asked for our IDs and if we had just left the party. Panicking because I was underage and had been drinking and smoking, I handed over my fake ID instead of my real one. He compared the ID to my cup, noticing that the names didn't match. When he questioned it, I blurted out that I wrote a fake name on the cup because I didn't want any stalkers from the party to know my real name. For whatever reason, he believed me and let us go. When we got in the car and sped away, we found out the two guys we were with had stolen 2 kegs from the party. Several of the underage attendees at the party were arrested on the spot, but we managed to avoid getting caught. To this day, over a decade later, my parents have no idea any of this happened. Story 23. Relevant backstory. I moved around a lot as a kid between family members because my mother wasn't fit to raise me. I consider my aunt and uncle my real parents. When I was 13, my 15-year-old cousin confided in me that he was unhappy living with his parents and wanted to run away to live with his biological father. He asked me to lock the back door when I woke up for school and to tell our mom he had already left for school. This would buy him time to get to his dad's house before anyone realized he wasn't coming home. I agreed and did as he asked because I thought he deserved to be happy. Since then, his life has spiraled. He treated his mother poorly, joined the military on his 18th birthday to escape his father, and now suffers from PTSD. He impulsively married a girl 7 weeks after meeting her, afraid of being alone during deployment, and they divorced on their 1-year anniversary. There's even controversy about whether he's the biological father of my nephew. He constantly moves around and hasn't held a stable job since leaving the military. It's been 10 years, and my aunt has no idea I helped him run away. I often blame myself for how his life turned out. If I had told my aunt and uncle about his plan, they could have stopped him. He might have grown out of his rebellious phase and avoided joining the military as an escape. My cousin and I still talk and hang out when we're in the same state, but I often wonder if I made the wrong decision. I'd rather he hate me for not helping him if it meant he wouldn't be miserable, divorced, or suffering from PTSD, but it's too late to change the past. Story 24. This is the story of my ignorantly suicidal pyromaniac phase. When I was in middle school, my parents were going through a divorce, and I was pretty reckless and stupid. One day while watching Looney Tunes, I saw an episode where Wile E. Coyote creates a trail of gunpowder to lead to an explosion meant to catch the Roadrunner. Inspired by this, I decided to recreate the scene. My dad, a hunter, had left his shotguns and ammo unsecured at home, probably out of negligence or because things were different back then. Armed with an X-Acto knife, I carefully peeled back the plastic casing on a dozen or so shotgun shells, dumping the gunpowder and shot into separate piles. I used the gunpowder to create a long trail on the ground, just like in the cartoon, and lit it. Sure enough, it worked exactly as it did on TV. The trail sparked and burned beautifully. I didn't think much of it at the time, but looking back, I realized how dangerous it was. I could have easily caused one of the shells to go off, seriously injuring or killing myself. I never told my parents, and my dad never noticed the missing shells. These days, I don't speak to my dad, and my mom is too old to hear about something that could give her a belated heart attack. This secret is staying buried. Story 25. About 4 years ago, I had a near disaster with one of my handguns. I was practicing how it felt concealed in my waistband and getting comfortable loading and unloading it, something I don't recommend doing with a live round. I had removed the magazine but forgot there was still a round in the chamber. As I pulled my pants up, I accidentally squeezed the trigger. For a few seconds, I was in complete shock before realizing I had narrowly missed my leg by about an inch. Once I snapped out of it, I frantically looked around. I spotted a small bullet hole in the floor and immediately started panicking. Our house was 2 levels, so my first thought was there must be a massive hole in the basement ceiling. Worse, I imagined the hollow point round ricocheting all over the basement. When I ran downstairs to check, to my immense relief, I couldn't find an exit hole. Somehow, the bullet hadn't made it all the way through the floor. I immediately called my friend, who responded with a panicked, "What the fuck?" After explaining what happened, we came up with a plan. I rushed to Walmart, bought wood glue and stain, and got to work. I opened all the windows and doors to air out the smell of gunpowder and brewed coffee to help mask the scent. Then I carefully filled the hole with wood glue and applied the stain. The colors didn't match perfectly, but it was close enough to go unnoticed. A few years later, my parents sold the house. and no one ever noticed the repair. To this day, I haven't told them, and I don't plan to. It's a secret that still makes my heart race just thinking about it. Story 26. When I was in 8th grade, I never told my dad about the chaos that unfolded in our small, meticulously kept apartment while he was away on his annual trip to Canada. It started when I invited a friend over. She brought her boyfriend, who decided to invite a few more friends. Before I knew it, 35 high school kids were packed into our tiny apartment. By 10 p.m., things had spiraled out of control. A keg was in the bathroom. People were smoking pot in my dad's room. Drawers were being opened. Marbles were being thrown. And glass was breaking. I was furious and terrified. My dad had a serious temper, and I knew this would end badly if he found out. But it was time to man up, even though I was just a scared 8th grade girl. I walked to the back of the apartment, raised my arm, and made a circling motion while yelling, "Okay, that's it. Everyone out. Out, out, out." I kept pushing people out the door until the place was empty. For the next 24 hours, I cleaned like my life depended on it. My dad had trained me to notice where everything was so I could put it back perfectly. I scrubbed, rearranged, and fixed everything I could. By the time he got home, the apartment was spotless. I was shaking with fear when he walked through the door, my teeth chattering as I waited for him to notice something was off. But he never said anything. Either he didn't notice, or he chose not to bring it up. I always thought that decades later, it would have been a funny story to tell him. Unfortunately, he passed away 14 years later, so I never got the chance. Looking back, I think he would have been proud that I had the guts to kick out a house full of big kids and take control. Story 27. This story needs some context. I was bullied my entire school life, from kindergarten through 8th grade. The bullying was relentless, and I often sought solace at a horse farm on the edge of town. It wasn't a rural town, but this spot became my safe place whenever I felt angry, sad, or depressed. I began digging there, carving out a small hideout. Over time, I turned it into a full-fledged underground base. I lined it with stones, created a makeshift plumbing system with water from a nearby lake, and even built a small furnace, or kiln, using limestone and clay. I rigged a system to release smoke slowly and discreetly through tiny holes, keeping the hideout hidden. One day, the bullying escalated to the worst it had ever been. I was beaten nearly to death by the usual group. During lunch, when we were allowed to leave school to walk home, I ran to my hideout instead. For the next month, I hacked into my mom's email and sent messages to the school claiming I was sick. Every day, instead of going to school, I went to my base. But my lack of architectural knowledge caught up with me. As I continued digging, the structure collapsed. The plumbing system flooded the entire area with water, turning it into a muddy mess. In a panic, I covered the site with logs and tried to make it look inconspicuous. I was terrified of what my parents would do if they ever found out. 5 years have passed since then, and I still visit the spot whenever I feel angry or upset, but I never dig again. The memory of what happened and the escape it gave me stays with me even now. Story 28. In the summer of 2013, my dad's military promotion moved us to El Paso for a year. I was a sophomore in high school, and my life revolved around school and football until I met a girl a few months before we had to leave. We got serious fast, and just before I moved away, I stole my dad's car in the middle of the night, picked her up, and we drove all over the city. I even taught her how to drive that night. After I left, our long-distance relationship became incredibly stressful. A few weeks later, I told her I'd quit football and get a job to save up money to visit her. And I did without my parents knowing. I couldn't get a real job, so I did odd labor jobs 4 days a week, earning $20 to $40 each time. Once I had enough money and courage, I went on the Greyhound website to buy a ticket to El Paso. I got a discount by using my military ID, but it had long since expired. I worried they'd reject it if I bought the ticket in person, so I convinced a friend to have their mom use her credit card to purchase it for me while I paid her back in cash. Watching it all unfold was nerve-wracking, but it worked. I told my parents I was going on a camping trip to explain my absence. I had already arranged a ride to the Greyhound station for $20 in gas money. After buying the ticket and paying for gas, I had $11 left. All I packed was some clothes, a bottle of water, and a small canister of peanut butter-filled pretzels. The trip from Raleigh, North Carolina to El Paso, Texas took 47 hours. I couldn't afford to spend any of my remaining money on food because I wanted to buy her a gift when I got there. By the time I reached Louisiana, I was starving. I'd already finished my pretzels and hunger was starting to hit me hard. In Shreveport, a young woman sat next to me on the bus. She was in college in Texas and visiting her dad in Louisiana. I wasn't sure if I could trust her with my story, but after talking for a while, I told her about my trip and how I hadn't eaten. To my surprise, she bought me a ton of food, which felt like a miracle. We parted ways in Dallas and the rest of the trip went smoothly. When I arrived in El Paso, it was amazing. I stayed with her family for 4 days, sleeping in her sister's bed, away from her, of course. Her parents, who were very wealthy, gave me money for food on my way back. They insisted on it. I returned the day before school started, and my parents never found out. If they had, I have no idea what the consequences would have been. Story 29. My dad's side of the family didn't tell him when his birth mother passed away. My mom only found out by reading the obituary. My dad's birth mom wasn't the best person, but still, it was cruel. His half-sister, a pastor and caregiver for their mom, had supported us during major family drama in the past, so I was shocked she wouldn't inform him. I wrote her a polite but direct letter asking why my dad hadn't been told. It turned out she had tasked one of her brothers with telling my dad. That brother didn't bother to do it, so my dad was left in the dark. He assumed his entire family hated him and decided to live with the pain of not saying a final goodbye. After receiving my letter, his half-sister apologized and explained what happened. She reached out to my family, spoke with my dad on the phone, and helped clear up some of the misunderstanding. They were able to sort out a few things, and I even learned some fascinating details about my dad's side of the family. Things I'm probably not supposed to know. My parents are extremely non-confrontational. If they found out I'd sent that letter, my dad wouldn't say anything, but my mom would definitely pull me aside and scold me for meddling. I have no regrets. My dad needed closure, and if I hadn't stepped in, he would have grieved alone. Sometimes it's worth breaking the rules to do what's right. Story 30. As a teenager, I worked hard to forgive my dad for his abandonment, unkindness, and drinking problems when I was younger. But now that I'm in college, I've come to terms with the fact that I will never love him again. In the past 1.5 years, he's gone off on me in horrible ways 3 separate times, and I'm done letting him be a dark cloud over my life. I changed my major a year ago and haven't told him. I text him occasionally, usually about mundane things like the weather, to avoid him asking too many questions about my life. I keep the conversation surface level because I never know what might set him off. The only time he treats me kindly is when I'm doing exactly what he wants me to do. He's paying my rent right now, so I hide my life from him. Some might say I'm taking advantage of him, but I see it as him making up for the years he disappeared financially when I was 10 to 14. My family shielded me from most of the details back then, but I know he wasn't there for us. When my lease is up, I plan to tell him everything. If he goes off on me again, I'm cutting ties. He thinks I'm a failure, but I'm not. I have a job where I've earned consistent raises. I get good grades, even while battling depression. And I've been on the executive board of a club for 2 years, running for president soon. I know I'll never be enough for him because he's not happy with himself, and that's not my burden to carry anymore. Story 31. When my parents divorced, the court ruled that my dad would pay alimony to my mom as long as she didn't get remarried or have a live-in boyfriend. Even with the alimony, my mom struggled financially. About a year later, she moved a man into our house. He started as a roommate, but they quickly began dating and hooking up. They kept separate bedrooms, but it was clear to me, even at 10 years old, that they were together. They tried to keep it a secret from me, but I figured it out. When my dad found out a man was living there, he took my mom to court to stop the alimony payments. I testified that the man was just a roommate and that I'd never seen him in my mom's room. I knew I was lying, but I also knew how much my mom needed the money to keep us afloat. The judge ruled in her favor, and my dad continued paying alimony until my mom remarried years later. To this day, I know my dad would lose it if he found out I lied. He still gets worked up about my mom and refuses to be civil around her. I wouldn't even put it past him to try to take her to court to reclaim those years of alimony. Even now, I don't regret what I did. My mom couldn't have kept our lives together without that money, and as a kid, I understood that. But it's a secret I'll carry with me forever. Story 32. I might tell my parents someday, but for now, this is the one big secret I've kept from them. And I normally tell my parents everything. We have a really good relationship. One time, my sister and I went to Knott's Scary Farm. We took the bus there and knew all we had to do was catch the last bus of the night to get home. Unfortunately, we ended up standing on the wrong side of the street and missed it. This was literally the last bus of the night, and the next one wouldn't come until 5 a.m. the following morning, which felt like 6 because it was fallback, daylight savings time. We could have taken a cab since our parents would have reimbursed us later, but we felt super guilty about spending that much money. Instead, we decided to wait it out all night at a 24-hour IHOP and Subway. It actually turned out to be quite an adventure. We played cards all night, and my sister taught me how to bridge shuffle. We spent a little on food, but the entire thing only cost us about $20 combined, way cheaper than a cab. I don't regret it at all. It's one of those memories I'll always treasure, but I know my parents would be horrified if they found out. So for now, it's staying a secret. Story 33. From the time I was about 7 until I entered high school, my little sister and I were looked after by a babysitter until our parents got home around 7 p.m. She was an older lady, much stricter than our parents, and we hated it at first. When we complained to our parents about her arbitrary rules or how mean she was, they just told us we were adjusting. They'd ask her to ease up, and she would agree, only to turn around the next day and ask us which one of us had tattled. After a while, we just stopped saying anything. She had a lot of rules about dinner. Our meals were predetermined by our parents and left in the fridge for her to heat up. Once we sat down for dinner, we weren't allowed to get up until we finished. Not even to use the bathroom. We also had to eat every bite on our plates. If we took too long or avoided something we didn't like, she'd threaten to feed us to make us eat faster. One day, my sister, who was about 7 at the time, took too long. The babysitter came over, put her in a headlock, and called her a baby who needed to be fed. My sister squirmed and cried, but the babysitter forced food into her mouth. I sat there in shock, watching her shove 2 forkfuls of food into my sister's face before letting her go and telling her to clean herself up and finish her dinner. We ate faster than ever that night. We never told our parents about how the babysitter treated us when they weren't around. To this day, I can't even remember what the meal was, though I used to think it was a microwavable chicken pot pie, but my sister disagrees. Now I'm a ridiculously fast eater, and I feel deeply uncomfortable leaving food on my plate. I've never really shaken that experience. Story 34. I spent nearly a year in my room suffering from deep depression. My parents assumed it was because I'd been dumped, and while that was part of it, the real reason was so much bigger. The girl and I hadn't been together long, but it felt perfect. We were both completely sold on each other, and I couldn't see a future where we didn't work out. Then she got pregnant. She couldn't handle it, and I completely understood. There were a lot of factors at play for her. I went with her when she decided to have an abortion, but the day after she broke up with me. In the span of 72 hours, I went from imagining a future with her, her family, including her 2 sisters and son, who I'd come to see as my own family, and a life I'd envisioned for us, to losing everything. My parents have never been emotional people like I am, so they wouldn't understand the depth of what I was going through. On top of that, my ultra-right-wing Christian mother would lose her mind if she ever found out about the abortion. I honestly have no idea how my dad would react, but I didn't feel like I could risk telling either of them. Thankfully, my best friend at the time was incredibly perceptive. She pieced everything together and told my brother, who then told my bandmates. They rallied around me, and those guys became closer than family, helping me through the worst of it. It took me 2 years to finally talk about it with anyone, but even now my parents have no idea what really happened. I don't think they ever will.